So, now we've reached the finale of this season of Doctor Who. Each story this season has been a step in the journey of our titular hero into a hero, and in this story we get the final step, or rather steps, in that journey, as the Doctor steps along the French countryside. But is the story engaging in its own right, or, like the Keys of Marinus, not worth much beyond its placement in the Doctor's journey? Let's check it out, and see for ourselves. So, this is it. When the TARDIS materializes this time around, the Doctor assures Ian and Barbara that he has returned them to their original time and place. But once the TARDIS crew head out to have a drink for old time's sake, they soon find that not only has the Doctor dropped them in the middle of France rather than England, but that he's done so right in the middle of the Reign of Terror. And then when some soldiers find the TARDIS crew and assume there's some escaped aristos, things take a turn for the worse as Ian, Barbara, and Susan are captured, and the Doctor, only having narrowly escaped, must rescue them. This is another pure historical, a story like Marco Polo or the Aztecs, where the only science fictional elements are the TARDIS itself, and it's also the other Season 1 story with missing episodes. Thankfully, the tapes for this serial were recovered in Cyprus, but, and I shit you not, this is actually what happened, the tapes for episodes 4 and 5 were damaged by a tank shell during the Turkish invasion of 1974. If you had no idea there even was such a conflict, don't worry, it's not exactly the most internationally famous war, but it does mean that for those episodes we have to rely on telesnaps and fan recordings of the audio, despite these being of much lower quality than what we got with Marco Polo. There is an animated recreation for these episodes, but I wanted to avoid those. Indeed, I suppose now is as good a time as any to clarify that when it comes to missing episodes, I want to avoid animated recreations as much as possible. This is no dig against the animators of these projects, I know that they're all labors of love, and I don't want to diminish the efforts of the people dedicated to making them a reality. However, when I review the missing episodes, I want to experience them in a form as close to the original broadcasts as possible. The animated recreations have a different directorial team behind them than the episodes they're recreating, with different sets, costumes, and shots, alongside little Easter eggs in the background that aren't present in the original. So, even if, as is the case of Reign of Terror, the telesnaps are not of the best quality, they are what I want to stick to. And even if episodes 4 and 5 are not of the best quality in either audio or visuals, the story of this still shines through. Up to this point, we've seen the Doctor and his companions thrust into all sorts of adventures, but for the most part they've stuck together, if not all as one unit, then at least in pairs. But in this story, the Doctor has to take the lead as all of his companions are captured and slated to be executed by the French authorities. Again, it's important to remember that when the Doctor first started his adventures with his companions, he was almost a Dr. Smith character, an antagonistic figure who just happened to be stuck with our heroes, as opposed to a hero himself. However, like Dr. Smith, the Doctor quickly stole the show from the original hero, Ian, and this story provides a final proving ground for the character. We've seen the Doctor help people despite his irascible nature, but can he carry the show all on his own? Can he successfully take center stage as he mounts a rescue of his companions from the guillotine? That's the question this serial occupies itself with, and as you have all probably guessed, the answer is yes. However, lest you assume the Doctor gets all the focus here, Ian and Barbara still get plenty to do. Susan gets short shrift in this serial, but I must side with Carol Ann Ford and defend her on the grounds that this is perhaps the most traumatic adventure she's been in thus far. I don't think it's unreasonable for her to be, as the director of the serial said, a bit maudlin. You might assume, given that this is an English production on the Reign of Terror, that its sympathies would lie firmly against Robespierre and his reign. And indeed, the first episode doesn't exactly dissuade you of that notion, presenting an image of poor, innocent aristos besieged by the unwashed and barbaric masses.
You can give them uniforms, Lieutenant, but they remain peasants underneath.
It's the sort of image you might expect from something like The Scarlet Pimpernel, and if you've seen Dominic Noble's video on that novel, it's the sort of image that might put you in a similar mood to the one he expresses in that. However, with each successive episode, we see a further muddying of this clear divide between good nobles and bad villains. We learn that the peasant Jean-Pierre's father was taken away by the authorities for unknown reasons, and when we finally meet Robespierre, we get the horrifying hint that it may have been simply to fulfill a quota. We see the rebel band led by Jules, comprised of men and women of varying social classes, and when Ian kills a traitor in the rebel band after being tortured by him, Barbara gives an impassioned speech which pretty eloquently sums up how the serial wants you to regard the Reign of Terror.
He was a traitor to you. To his side, he was a patriot.
Barbara, we've taken sides just by being here. Jules actually shot him. He could just as easily have been me.
And what about Robespierre? I suppose you think
Just because an extremist like Robespierre...
Barbara, Jules is our friend. He saved
I
our
know
lives.
all that. The revolution isn't all bad. Neither are the people who support it. It's changed things for the whole world. And good, honest people gave their lives for that change.
Well, he got what he deserved.
You check your history books, Ian, before you decide what people deserve.
I mentioned before the Turkish invasion of Cyprus, and I would reckon that not too many of you have heard of that conflict. So, answer me this. If you were traveling with the Doctor, and the TARDIS took you to Cyprus in 1974, how would you be able to distinguish the good guys from the bad guys? The ultimate message of the Reign of Terror here is that just because history books neatly divide conflicts into sides, when history is happening around you, when you're in the thick of it, it's not as easy to neatly divide people into labels like good guy or bad guy. Ultimately, everyone's goal in this story is simply survival. And thankfully, by the end of the story, the TARDIS crew has survived and returned to their home. And that's the thing. It's at this point that Ian and Barbara realize that the TARDIS is their home now. It won't be their home forever, but as the Doctor looks out into the limitless stars, he realizes that maybe all this hopping about in all of time and space may be a life unto itself. And with that, the Doctor's journey is complete, and while this chapter of his life ends, the adventure is just beginning. This novelization was written by Ian Marter, who, good God, it's me! Jesus, the... Okay, I'm actually getting a little freaked out here. Can we get a different picture? Okay, that's better. Jesus. Okay. So, yes, this is Ian Marter, who actually got started out on Doctor Who as an actor, playing the Fourth Doctor's companion Harry Sullivan in Season 12 of the program. Harry had been conceived to take on the same role Ian took in the season, as the man of action who punched things and leapt through windows, in case they got an actor like Billy Hartnell for the role of Doctor who couldn't do such stunts. After casting Tom Baker, who was only too happy to do stunts, Harry became redundant and was written out, but Ian Marter was well liked and well regarded by the cast and crew, and he stayed involved with the program in a writing capacity. Because of this, and the reputation his writing resume enjoys, I confess I was looking forward to reading his novelization of The Reign of Terror. Sure, it was a novelization of a story of a different era than the one Marter worked in, but surely that wouldn't pose too much of a problem, right? Well, unfortunately, after reading this Target book, I became just as disappointed as I was with Philip Hinchcliffe's novelization of The Keys of Marinus. And what's especially weird is that, unlike Hinchcliffe, Marter actually does create a more horror-focused atmosphere in his novelization. Then when you remember that Marter was hired right when Hinchcliffe first took over as producer for Doctor Who, but then Harry was written out right before Hinchcliffe seriously began the show's transition into horror, the motivation of this creative decision becomes increasingly muddled and your head starts to hurt. Whatever the case, even the TARDIS's materialization in this novel has a frightening characterization to it, and several scenes have some additional gruesome details to them in the novel version. For instance, instead of simply slapping the jailer, Barbara scratches his face hard enough to leave a scar. And if you think that's bad, you should see what happens to Robespierre. In the serial, he only gets shot, and we only see the aftermath of it, his face tastefully covered with a handkerchief. But in the novel, his fate is much more gruesome, and we get to see all the blood and bone fragments and bits of glass described in loving, grisly detail. And if you think that's bad, you should see him before the scars. In the original serial, Robespierre is a paranoid but cunning and intelligent man, but in the novel he's a feral animal, constantly growling and hissing and with gangrenous pustules on his terrifying visage to emphasize his monstrousness. Mind you, the novel isn't all bad. there are some lovely additional details to it, like how Susan's comment of this being the Doctor's favorite period of Earth history gets explored further, while in the serial it was just a throwaway line. During the Doctor's trek to Paris, Marter gives us a look into his head, and we get to see him geek out at the landscape and architecture. There's even this really adorable scene where the Doctor gets upset when he remembers that, of course he can't see the Bastille now, it was torn down, remember? And the novel goes into much greater detail on this point in history and the figures important to it. Also, one thing the novel gets across with amazing skill and panache is just how oppressive the summer heat is in France, and how it puts all the characters slightly on edge throughout the story. Other changes Marter makes, though, are worse than worthless. For instance, in the original serial, all the characters can understand one another, and while the idea of TARDIS translation circuits hadn't been invented yet, it's still the same principle where the French people are all speaking French, and the English characters are all speaking English, but this is just hand-waved away because the story has more important things to occupy itself with. Marter, however, decides to change things up by removing the translation circuits and having the TARDIS crew possess varying degrees of fluency in French. So Ian barely speaks any French at all, Barbara speaks it well enough, but is clearly not a native speaker, Susan speaks it with full fluency, and while the Doctor does too, his courtly manner of speech makes people assume that he's an aristo. Now, there's a lot that you could do with this new feature of the story. It's a small change, but it can have huge ramifications for how things turn out. Yet, despite all the new possibilities this detail presents, none of them are explored. The story proceeds exactly as it does in the serial. So you might think, oh, well, that's a shame, that seems like a waste of potential, but in fact, it actually makes the story worse! Because if Ian doesn't speak French well enough to have any conversations in it, then the fact that someone is able to eavesdrop on his conversation clues the reader into the fact that they're an English spy right away. The only thing that comes from this change of the story is Marter giving away a huge twist in that story. And then, to top it all off, he also clues you into who the traitor in Jules' group is for no reason. Then, just to twist the knife in further, the big speech at the end where the TARDIS crew discuss the possibility of warning Napoleon of his eventual fate is slightly different than in the serial, but in a way that shows that Marter has a wildly different idea of how time travel works than the show did at this point. In the original serial, warning Napoleon would be futile because Napoleon was simply the man of his station of larger historical trends. Like killing baby Hitler, even if warning Napoleon changed some details to the historical record, the basic thrust of history would remain the same. And besides, if you were approached by some random stranger babbling on about your future, would you listen to them? In the novel, though, warning Napoleon would be futile because all the wibbly-wobbly timey-wimey bullshit metaphysics would stop you. Like, to prevent the creation of a time paradox, time itself would intervene to put some obstacle in your path. And maybe that's how time travel works in New Who, but at this point in the series, it feels incongruous and odd. Too many of the changes Marter makes either don't actually add anything at all or create plot holes, and I am severely disappointed. Yeah, I honestly was hoping this would be the third novel victory in this series. Even knowing that it would treat the story as just another adventure instead of a season finale, I was willing to give Ian Marter a chance, and he blew it. Maybe when I get to his other novelizations they'll fare better, but for this one, I've got to give it to the original serial. Maybe in season 2 there will be novelization writers besides Andrew Robinson who are amazing. I don't know. But for now, I'm Marco King, and if you like this video and would like to help this channel out, please consider liking, commenting, or subscribing. Don't forget to ring that bell if you want to catch new episodes each Saturday tea time, and don't forget to share this video to help boost it in the algorithm. Thank you all for watching, and a special thank you to the BBC and Dominic Noble for not suing the pants off of me. Bye bye.